All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Neil Chase, the CEO here at CalMatters, with Julie Cart, who is an environmental writer for CalMatters. Julie's been doing this for a few years. And Julie, one of the things I love about you is that you started out as a sports reporter, like all good journalists, because once you can cover sports on deadline, you can do pretty much anything,
Amen
right?
to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Keeping score.
exactly. And now Julie's keeping score in the games that we play between Earth and the environment. So slightly bigger stakes, but you've been covering this stuff for a while, and you won a Pulitzer Prize for your coverage involving fires when you were at the Los Angeles Times across the West. And we're going to talk today about wildfires in California, and the the sense that a lot of us have just living in this state is that it seems to be getting worse. But you've actually been following this stuff for a long time. Are wildfires really getting worse in California?
Wildfires are getting worse in California. Um, we have on our site these wonderful things called explainers, and we have one for wildfires that we endeavor to update regularly. And at the beginning of this season, my editor, Marla Cohn, asked me to provide an update, and I sent her the emoji that shows someone shrugging. It is very iterative every year, bigger, more, sooner, and more deadly. So what's happening is all the physics of fire, everything that creates and grows fires obviously remains the same, but there are more of us living in that place that fire people call the wildland urban interface. That's just like next to wilderness or trees and things like that. And it becomes more and more imperative to put out those fires because obviously there are people's lives at stake. There are resources, buildings, and things like that. So um, the we are attacking more fires, so we're putting them out sooner if they can. So we're not letting those forests and the fuels, which is anything that's flammable, to reduce in the forest, and that's one problem. And the other that sounds like the opposite of what I just said is the size of the fires. Because of the extreme heat, because of the aridity over years and decades, and the size of the trees and the flammable material, we have mega fires and gigafire, million-acre fires. So just so far this year, and so we're talking, now in August, there are about 4,500 fires that have burned or more than that. And the difference is 4 to 5 times more acres have burned. And that's the problem, getting the arms around the fire. So there's an inevitability. We're in a flammable landscape. It is a natural system. It's just that there are larger fires and there's more of them. And when they start, they go.
And they burn hotter and they go faster, right? Um, I don't want to sound like that person who says global warming isn't real because it's cold outside, but we've had a lot of rain lately, right? So shouldn't we be at less fire danger now with all this rain?
Rain in the winter, which we love, and my colleagues who write about water, just, that's a wonderful thing for them to note. It creates good things, but on the other hand, it creates things to grow. So we have more brush. Things are flourishing on hillsides. So if you look at a green hillside in the winter and think, isn't that lovely? In the summer, when the heat starts hitting and dries out all that vegetation, those are just flashpoints. They're called flashy fires because they burn very fast and they move quickly and create all this wind. So there's another side to that. And then you create that cycle of those hillsides that are green, then they burn. And then if we are lucky enough to have rainfall again in the winter, those are they slide down and end up in backyards in Montecito and Santa Barbara and around the state. So there's really not much good there.
And there's no, I mean, if it's dry, we're going to have fires. If there's rain, we're going to have fires and mudslides. I mean, the weather is not going to help us here, right? I mean, fires are going to get worse no matter what the weather is what it sounds like you're saying. Is that right?
Fires may. We've had a couple of years of quiet fire seasons. And that has something to do with weather, of course, climate, which is weather writ large over decades and centuries. A lot of it has to do with the approach to fighting fires and what you do in the off season. So California and the U.S. Forest Service, which is a big player in our state because they own 70 something percent of the forested land in the state. So, CAL FIRE only has a tiny, tiny percentage of responsibility for uh, forested or land that is managed for fire, and it's really the Forest Service. So we have these massive national forests, which are wonderful, and there are watersheds, and they're very important to us for recreation and other reasons. Um, the way to kind of knock this cycle down is to either remove vegetation. So there's a couple ways to do it. One is hand crews go in there, and it's very tedious, it's very time consuming and extremely costly. You cut down trees. A guy with a saw, he cuts down a tree when a crew, when they pull them out, or they have these giant, very cool looking machines, and it's just like a jaw, and it goes, and it crunches up a tree, and it basically pulls it out by its roots. You do not want to be around that thing. But so you reduce the fuel load. So when a fire comes through, there's less to burn, and the trees that are standing are these big behemoths that are fire adapted. So they may have a bark that prevents the tree from really being damaged at its core. Um, so that those trees still live and stand, but the understory, the ladder fuels, the stuff that goes up and up and up and leads the fire to the top, which is a crown fire. I'm using all these euphemisms. My editor would roll over in her bed, I hope. But that's what happens. So you have to clean the forest out, not rake it, but remove vegetation, not in a wholesale way, but it's extremely expensive. And there's several problems with it. And another way is burning, as we all know, prescribed burns. Those can take 3 years to plan because it has to be in the exact right spot with the right slope and the proper vegetation. You have to get air board sign in. All the neighbors have to know about it and that sort of thing. So those things, and you plan it, and then on the day, the wind kicks up, you just abandon that. And people also don't like to see smoke. So
Yeah.
there's an aversion to cutting trees and there's an aversion to burning trees. And so there is a lot of pushback from the public.
So it's really hard to come up with an easy, clear strategy for how you make sure that we're not going to have wildfires in the future. We're talking about this, Julie, because wildfires and your reporting on wildfires are the topic of this month's CalMatters for Learning segment. We're putting in the chat here a couple of the tools you can use. The explainers about wildfires that Julie just mentioned, just dropped into the chat the address where you can get this material. The California State Library is helping us do this, and thanks to them for that support. We are able to create these learning packages that are available for libraries, for other organizations, for schools, for classrooms, with curriculum, with teaching materials, both in Spanish and English, to try to help people understand some of these stories. And Julie, as people see the fires going on, if you live in a big city, you're probably likely to be affected by the smoke more than seeing a fire next to you. If you live in a heavily treed rural area, you might actually see the fire and have to evacuate. What should we be doing? How can we think about either keeping ourselves safe, or what can those of us who don't live next to a fire zone, actually do to try to help reduce either the danger of the fires or the danger of something, bad effects on us?
Well, since we're CalMatters and we're very deeply wonky and live and die by policy, let me start with that because there's two sides to it. I mean, we live in this environment and we choose to live here for lots of good reasons, but we need to acknowledge where we live. If you talk to fire scientists, they say that the only thing in California that won't burn are parking lots and things like that. So, and unless you are in that environment, you are going to face either the flames themselves or the implications of fire. And there's a lot of public health problems associated, respiratory problems, heart lung problems associated with fires, with the flames, the smoke, and things like that. I mean, it affects vineyards, it affects anyone trying to grow anything. So the heat put out by the fire can basically sear and burn down into soils and kill all the nutrients that are in soils and basically render them useless. One thing we have to do, and I'm not allowed to say have to, experts say, we need to understand that fire is a natural part of where we live, part of the system. There are trees that need fire to propagate, big pines that have these really tight pine cones. The heat opens them, the seeds fall out, they fall into the ground in a nutrient-rich soil with nitrogen from burned material, and they're going to grow. So it's a natural process. Because we live here, we can't let that go in its natural way. But Californians have to be comfortable with fire and not say fire bad and our reptilian brain kick in. So when you see or hear about prescribed burns where there's going to be trees burning in an area, they're usually very small, 3 or 4 acres. People get on the phone and call their sheriff or call their city council and say there's a giant fire. It's a prescribed burn. It's needed. And in California, what's happening that's newish in the last 5 or so years is going to tribes in the state who have used fire for as a tool for forever since they've been here. And we're starting to tap in, our officials are starting to tap into their knowledge, and they're leading a lot of this work. So what can we do? There's a lot to do regarding hardening your home, preparing your home with this defensible space and not storing logs next to a redwood deck under a shake roof. That would be a start. But we also have to understand that fire is necessary, it's natural, and it will be used as a tool, and we can't panic when we see one, or a fire is managed for that purpose.
Yeah, it's intimidating. We do welcome questions. Anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat here, and we'll throw them into the conversation. Julie, when we look at the causes of this, right, we talk about fires that start from lightning, we talk about fires that start from carelessness, we talk about arson, and there's probably a level of, somewhere between carelessness and arson is a level of stupidity that becomes arson pretty quickly, right? But what causes most of the fires, and is there anything we can do about the causes as opposed to fighting them?
The natural cause fires, there's not an awful lot. I can get to those in a second. The statistics are 90 to 95% of the fires, not just in California, but across the country, these are wildfires, are caused by humans. And that includes, of course, in California, utility caused fires from equipment, lines, all the things that go to bringing power to us. And I just wrote about that. Some unusual people being careless. You don't think about it, and that generally, as my parents used to tell me, when you don't think, this is when these things happen. I mean, it doesn't occur to you that the tailpipe on your car is very, very hot, and if you pull off the side of the road and there's high grass, you'd be shocked how frequently that causes a fire, and it gets out of hand right away, and you panic and you don't know what to do. I'm not a firefighter. Obviously, the cigarette butt out the window, the campfire not being properly put out. I learned a new one from a Forest Service person who told me about people setting fire to toilet paper in the backcountry rather than packing it out. Seems like a nice idea and tidiness, but they get out of hand. So fires really, when they begin, even with a tiny spark, and if there's enough around them to burn, boom, it's gone. So that's really awful. So humans start a lot of the fires, and stupidity cannot be guarded against, but there are some other mechanisms. And I think people a lot of it is awareness. You just didn't think, oh gosh, didn't occur to me that could happen. Trains start a lot of fires, trucks. So anywhere we humans interact with the natural environment, it's always possible. I do want to say one quick thing about lightning. A couple years ago, we had this series of lightning strikes, tens of thousands, in places where they weren't expected, at a time where they were not expected, and in an environment that hadn't seen fire in 40 or 50 years or more, which means it was really built up and very dense forests. And they were the power that these lightning strikes carry, I think we all understand. And then when you put that in an environment that can burn, it couldn't be controlled. And it was the first time that fire had burned across the Sierra. It was the first time in anyone's memory that there were that whole coastal fog area. The fog hadn't come in because of probably climate change and other factors, but trees were burning that had never seen fire before. Not to anthropomorphize, but there was no response. There was no natural response to that. So
Yeah.
yeah, natural cause fires are not as common. And basically you're just talking about lightning.
There's a question in the chat here to go back a little bit to what you referred to earlier with native California communities, right? And the techniques they used for many years to do controlled burns, but other things they did. Like just asking you to talk a little bit more about, what are those techniques, and are modern firefighting folks really paying attention finally now to these ancient techniques that used to work?
The fire service is a paramilitary organization, and that's not my definition. That's how they see themselves. They're very hidebound. They have traditions and they do things their way and use the language of the military. They fight, they attack, this sort of thing. So to use, it's called fire use or fire as a tool is difficult for them because they have to ratchet down and they want to use big tools. Native Americans across the country, mainly across the Midwest and the West, have used fire to clear land, to drive game in some cases, and to replenish, to rejuvenate the landscape, because fire can do that. So they're small fires. They are controlled, meaning there are people on what would be the perimeter. They do a lot of preparation. And in the case of Native Americans, they're picking spots very carefully because like North Coast tribes need certain reeds, and they use a lot of the material in their landscape to build canoes and baskets and things like that, traditional uses. So they're teaching these big, tough CAL FIRE folks, be gentle, be careful. So it's been a very interesting dialogue and a learning process, mainly on the CAL FIRE side and other groups. And the other thing that's happening, Neil, is the state has now extended the right or the ability of Native American groups and others that have what are considered proper training to do the training themselves to homeowners and to community groups. So they're kind of cutting out CAL FIRE, which has other things to do, and letting communities do things themselves, learn themselves. And it's a real important buy-in, and people say, yes, this is my community. I want to have a role in saving it or something to do with its future. So Native Americans are very excited about doing this because it acknowledges their hundreds and hundreds of years of knowledge about the environment, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah, we have experts. Is it happening enough? Is it happening at scale? Are these isolated little things in a couple places in the state, or is this sort of getting into the CAL FIRE mentality and getting into some of these communities?
Well, it's amping up. But if you think about what we used to say, fire season, maybe April, May, June to October, November, now it's referred to as a fire year. There is no time. Paradise, the town that burned to the ground and killed 85 people, was a fire in January. So there is no season where there's a window where you could say, here, we can go do this burning now because it's safe. It's not too hot. There's not high winds. I mean, there's not a moment that we're out of danger. We may be at a lower standard or a lower designation. So that's one problem. But everyone understands this. Obviously, fire officials understand this problem. So the tribal prescribed burn program is ramping up and it's getting bigger and bigger. Again, only stymied by the timing that they have available to them to do the fires. Separate to that, the state has an agreement or MOU with the U.S. Forest Service where they pledge, watch out for pledges. They pledge to clear a certain percentage or a certain amount of acreage every year, and it's very difficult to meet that goal. It's an aspirational goal. There's money involved. It would shock you how much money it costs. And then again, this whole issue of when is it safe to do the work. So there's a much broader understanding and acceptance of using fire as a tool, which is often used on big fires anyway. They're called backfires. You know, if you burn out around a fire, it reaches that it's a fire break. You know, they say fight from the black. So your feet are in where it's already been burned. That fire will come toward you, and it will stop, at least on the ground, because you burn that. So
Because there's nothing
fire,
left to burn.
precisely. Except if, you know, it's a wind-driven fire, then you have these embers that are traveling 2 and 3 miles. There's not a lot of wonderful scenarios, but there are things that can be done, and they're being adopted more widely here.
Yeah. Is there anything being done in other states or other countries that we're not doing here that is either being seriously considered or should be?
One thing that, because I think it's top of mind to a lot of Californians, the number of fires that are caused by some mechanism of a utility, PG&E, unfortunately, being the great example of this. A lot of it comes from
By
lines.
that you mean power lines, right? Primarily?
Yes, sometimes it's transformers. There's a lot of equipment out there, and it is in far-flung places. And now, because of requirements from the state, there are cameras on this equipment. There are these interesting devices that you can put that are clamped onto lines. So when it's windy, it's electronic, it's Wi-Fi, and it tells us the central system, these lines are moving and it's dangerous. They also know, because through mapping, I mean, it's astonishing. They know how many feet away, what height, what age, and the dryness of all the vegetation around their stuff. And that's in light and self-interest. I mean, they don't want to start fires, but that equipment is very expensive. So what is California doing relative to the rest of the world? In Australia, which in many ways mirrors California with both climate and weather and the materials. You know, they have eucalyptus, they have very much the same sort of stuff growing. You may not put in a power line unless it's buried. And it has its own issues. It's quite expensive, which there is not passed on to the ratepayer, but would certainly happen in California. So PG&E is considering that, and other the big utilities are. So that's one thing that could take out a pretty common form of fire starts, which is to bury on these lines underground. And that's out in backcountry. It's not about tearing up streets in a city and all that kind of thing. It can be done. It's expensive. And if you think about the service systems where they are, going up and down mountainsides, it's not a simple thing at all, and it will take decades.
And I heard what you said about the cost being passed on to the ratepayers, to us, right? We're gonna pay for this one way or another.
Right, right.
One other related topic, something you've covered a lot, is the firefighters themselves, right? The challenges to the people who are fighting these fires as fire season becomes fire year, as your deployments get longer. You've done some work on some of the real personal impact this has on firefighters that I think a lot of people don't notice, because if a firefighting crew is going to be, you know, up there fighting fire someplace, we don't see them. But without making you go through a lot of it, I know it's difficult, but just to give us a sense of what has been the impact on the firefighters themselves in recent years as this has gotten worse.
Well, I'm sure most Californians understand that this is dangerous, harrowing work. But you know, we put up signs, "Thank you, firefighters," and throw teddy bears at them and ribbons. You know, they leave the fire, but the fire doesn't leave them. So one thing to remember about CAL FIRE in particular is these are not just wildland firefighters. They have agreements with counties and cities. They are the local firefighters. They work out of fire stations. They get cats out of trees. They go to car accidents. They do all the things that a local firefighter would do, structure fires, and they deploy to wildfires. So I've done, as you say, Neil, a lot of work on this, and I think some of the most impactful events for those folks often are responding to traffic accidents, train accidents. The things they see can't be unseen. The the destruction to humans, and then they go back to the station and they do it again and again and again, and then they go out to fires and they're deployed for 21 days. um, there's just never a break. It is there's a code. These are type A people, men and women, and it's not cool. It hasn't been in the past, unfortunately, to talk about trauma or stress. Some of it is stress. I am tired. Some of it is, that's one layer. There's a layer of, I just saw my buddy get burned over, or I just saw a family of 3 die in a horrific way in a car accident, or, you could go on and on. And it doesn't get turned off. They don't get enough time at home. They get home, it takes them a week to decompress. They may self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, huge problem. I talked to a battalion chief who said 80% of the folks in his fire station had divorced in that year. I mean, there are people quitting. There is an epidemic, and that's the word used by CAL FIRE, of suicide, suicidal ideation, PTSD. So, it's inherently dangerous and
Yeah,
traumatic. And what they're trying to work through now is how to handle that, how to create a culture, which we also trying to do writ large in this country, where it's okay to talk about, I'm not feeling well today, I need a break, and that's not perceived as weakness. So
right.
yeah.
No, it's difficult. I'm dropping in the chat here a link to the work that you did together with CBS News on this story, and some interviews that people can see with some of these firefighters, and just get a better sense of what the risk and what the firefighters go through and endure to do this work. We are at the bottom of the half hour here, so we're going to wrap things up. I want to thank our friends at the California State Library for making this possible. Encourage you to go to that calmatters.org/forlearning site to get the learning materials you can share with communities. And especially Julie, thank you. Thanks for spending the half hour with us. And I think more thanks for the work you've done to help us all understand this this significant and growing and probably not going away anytime soon problem.
Yeah, it's where we are. It's where we live, and I'd like to thank everybody, including the library system. As a kid who used the library as a nanny, they're fantastic, and anything we can do to help, we will definitely try.
That's what we're here for, and we appreciate the libraries being here for us as well. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate you coming, and we'll do this again next month on a different topic. Thanks so much.